Self-referential bias is our tendency to prioritize ourselves and to interpret and recall information in a way that is personally relevant to ourselves. In other words, we often perceive information in a manner that aligns with our own experiences, beliefs, and emotions. This phenomenon, known as egocentric bias, illustrates a distinct human tendency to place ourselves at the center of attention and give preference to information that is directly relevant to ourselves. A striking example of self-referential bias is the way we remember certain dates and faces. We find it easier to recall our own birthdays compared to our spouses or other family members' birthdays. The self-referential bias also manifests in how we recognize physical features. For example, among a crowd of children in a photograph, we can quickly and accurately identify our own children's faces. This is not just because a function of familiarity. It is an ingrained preferences for information that has direct personal relevance. The self-referential bias also extends into our auditory and visual senses, as evidenced by phenomena like the cocktail party effect. Imagine being engaged in a lively conversation at a bustling cocktail party. Amid the chatter and the laughter, your ears suddenly pick up the mention of your name from across the room. Even though you were engrossed in a different conversation, your attention was immediately diverted to your name. This demonstrates a heightened sensibility to self-related auditory cues. The cocktail party effect has a visual counterpart as well. Among a sea of text or within a complex visual environment, our eyes are naturally drawn to our names faster than others' names. This visual version of the cocktail party effect is yet another testament to how self-referential bias operates across different sensory systems. The self-referential bias has profound implications for social interactions and communications. We often unconsciously assume that others share our knowledge, beliefs, and values, leading to misunderstandings and communication breakdowns. Marketers and advertisers often capitalize on the self-referential bias by personalizing advertisements and products, knowing that customers are more likely to respond to content that resonates with their personal experiences and identities. At the core of mental process of the self-referential bias is working memory, also known as short-term memory, which temporarily holds and manipulates information. Working memory serves as a mental workspace where information is stored for brief periods. Consider reading a book. Your working memory is actively holding each word, maintaining it in temporary storage just long enough for comprehension until you reach the end of the sentence. Working memory serves a critical function that allows you to weigh different pieces of information when making complex decisions. Self-related information tends to dominate this mental workspace, often outcompeting other information. Specific regions of the brain, such as the bilateral and superior frontal cortex and the superior bilateral parietal cortex, have increased activity when processing self-related information. Those brain regions are intricately connected to working memory. When information is encoded with self-relevance, it's retained more effectively, forming stronger memory traces. This explains why personal experiences and self-related facts are often remembered better than impersonal or abstract information. In group settings, the self-referential bias can be observed when evaluating contributions to group accomplishments. If you ask each member of a 4-person team to estimate their individual contribution to the group's success, you'll often find that the combined percentages far exceed 100%. Each member is unconsciously inclined to attribute more to their efforts, overlooking or undervaluing the contribution of others. However, by merely reframing the question to focus on the contributions of each group member rather than our own, the self-referential bias can be substantially reduced. By shifting attention away from oneself and toward others, the balance of recognition is corrected, and a more accurate evaluation of group dynamics emerges. Here is an example of the self-referential bias in history. In the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, the United States grappled with a critical decision: the location of its future capital. The question led to spirited debate and ultimately a compromise between Southern and Northern representatives in the turbulent years of the 1780s. The Residence Act of 1790 set the stage for a resolution, designating the permanent capital's location along a 65-mile stretch of the Potomac River. However, the act left the precise location of the 10-mile square federal district undefined, sparking further deliberation and controversy. Responsibility fell to George Washington, the country's first president. Congress empowered him not only to choose the site, but also appoint and oversee 3 commissioners tasked with surveying and constructing the Capitol. In a move that stirred contention, Washington selected a site less than 20 miles from his own home at Mount Vernon. His decision, rather than deferring to his appointed commissioners, was seen by some as high-handed, igniting accusations of a conflict of interest. Washington's holdings along the Potomac River were extensive, and his proximity to the capital undoubtedly increased the value of his property. John Adams lamented Washington's gain, alleging that he and his family had profited from the federal city to the tune of 1,000% at the expense to the public of more than his whole fortune. The decision's shadow fell on Washington's reputation, challenging a man who had always prided himself on his integrity and sense of honor. The incident stands as an early American example of how self-referential bias can affect even the most esteemed leaders. Our tendency to prioritize self-related information permeates the way we perceive, think, and behave. It can give rise to the egocentric decisions and self-serving behavior, regardless of one's positions or status. Leaders are not immune to self-referential bias. The temptation to favor personal interest can sometimes overshadow the greater good. The self-referential bias underscores the need for checks and balances to hold leaders accountable and prevent them from making unfair, self-centered decisions. Organizations should implement different incentives to reward leaders for selflessness and integrity. Incentives don't have to be purely monetary. They can include social recognition, reputation enhancement, or even simple expressions of gratitude. Sometimes a heartfelt thank you note or public acknowledgement can be as powerful as a bonus or an employer-paid vacation in encouraging ethical leadership. Start observing your decision-making process and those of others around you. See if you can spot instances of self-referential bias. Please feel free to share your comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.